Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from Ezra Henderson, who says, "What is your opinion on double standards? Is it okay for some groups you may agree with to have double standards? If so, what makes it not okay for the groups you may disagree with to use double standards?" Well, if it were okay for groups that I agree with to have double standards, but it wouldn't be okay for groups I disagree with to have double standards, that would be a double standard, wouldn't it? I don't think double standards are okay. I don't think they're fair anytime they pop up. I think in the current state of our culture, a great deal of the inequality and the racism and sexism and discrimination against LGBT folk that we see is in the form of double standards. People are treated different ways for the same conditions based on factors that shouldn't merit such discrimination. A good proposed example from recent news is the situation with the armed would-be separatists up in Oregon who have taken control of that federal wildlife refuge. There are quite a few of us who suspect that if the men taking control of that facility were, say, dark-skinned Muslims instead of white Christians, the reaction would have been quite different, and the level of threat that they were perceived to represent would have been much, much higher, because there is a double standard in place that judges or that determines how we regard people of a certain skin color or a certain religious or ethnic background when they do the same sorts of things that white folks do. That would be a double standard, and that would be wrong. If people that I agree with practice double standards, again, that's wrong. I will not apologize or defend people using double standards or living by double standards. Now, I mean, we all have biases. We all have prejudices. We all, I think, apply double standards from time to time in our lives. I don't think it's something that can be avoided entirely, but I do think it's part of trying to be better people and trying to rid ourselves of our biases, or at least not allow ourselves to be directed by them. That if we are made aware of a double standard that we are using, that we be honest with ourselves enough to admit it and to try to not do that anymore. Nobody's perfect. We all have biases. We all have double standards, but if we're made aware of them, we should do our best to correct them. Alphonse rides again. "Hey Steve, do you think part of the reason you've become such a target for MRAs and YouTube dickwads is because they realize that views on feminism, etc. aside, you're pretty similar to them? You won't mind me saying that, much like me, you're a fairly nerdy guy, into movies, comics, sci-fi, not exactly a social butterfly, etc., etc. It's just that you happen to have the humility and empathy to understand your privilege, while they do not. Thoughts?" Well, it probably has something to do with it, at least in some cases. I wouldn't say necessarily that I understand my privilege, but I at least am aware of it and strive to understand it and strive to acknowledge it. And that maybe is a difference between those of us who are often derided as social justice warriors versus those who consider concern about social justice and a desire to advocate for social justice as some kind of a flaw or some kind of a bad thing or something that you ought to be ashamed of. The willingness to just simply acknowledge that you have some social privilege, that seems to be lost on a lot of these people. They seem completely unwilling to acknowledge that they have privilege in any sense, which is kind of weird because pretty much everybody does have some form of privilege, especially in the United States. Or not just the United States, but the Western society, advanced cultures that tend to have more wealth, better access to education, better access to technology, clean water, strong economies, etc. Like we are all privileged in some way or another relative to some other group of people. So we all have it. It's not as if saying, well, there's white privilege, or there's Christian privilege, or there's, cis privilege, or hetero privilege, or male privilege. It's not as if people are being singled out. Everybody is privileged in some way or another compared to another group of people. And for whatever reason, a lot of the people who are anti-feminist, anti-social justice, who sort of look down their nose very snidely at these things, they just refuse to acknowledge that they are privileged in some way, and that it matters, that it's important to be aware of that, and that we as individuals can play some role in helping to correct the inequality that is created and sustained by that imbalance of privilege and lack of privilege. To bring up your point about how, other than my political views or my support of social justice, I'm a lot like them. We share similar interests like comics and sci-fi and stuff. There's that. I think that's part of it. I also think they don't like being reminded that their views are not mainstream. They spend a lot of time insisting that their views are mainstream, insisting that they do speak for the majority, that most people do feel the same way that they do. And to people like the folks you're talking about, the YouTube dickwads and so forth, they don't seem to recognize that. They seem to have this inverted view of the world where they're the ones that have the clear, unbiased picture, and it's the rest of the world that has somehow fallen victim to a conspiracy or been duped into thinking that these sorts of disadvantage and lack of privilege and inequality don't exist, or aren't important. Or is that the other way around? I kind of flipped that. But yeah, I think you're probably onto something. Danae Dennison. Steve, how do you feel about terms that paint a disadvantage in a more positive light? After I saw a meme of an electric cart abandoned in an aisle because it had a dead battery with the words, "A miracle happened," so deeply offended me, I found a TED Talk where the young lady speaking used the term diversely abled. While I don't think it's a given that a diversely abled person has special abilities, I do know that there are blindish skills I have. Maybe there's something to her term. I understand people not wanting to be defined by their disadvantage. I think if you are a person who has a particular disability and you prefer not to be called disabled, but differently abled is another term I've heard, or diversely abled, as you say in your question, I have no problem with that. I'll refer to people however they prefer to be referred. It's a little bit like the idea of if you don't know how the name of a town is supposed to be pronounced, you pronounce it however the people who live there tend to pronounce it. I am fortunate enough to occupy a fairly privileged envelope in my life. I really, the only underprivileged thing about me in terms of my various identities is that I'm an atheist in a country that is predominantly religious and specifically Christian. So if someone from a marginalized category, a disadvantaged category, uses a particular term to describe them or describe their group, I just go with whatever they want. So if you or someone else or a group of someone else's prefers the term diversely abled to disabled, then I think that's perfectly fine. I will strive to use that term. I'm constantly having to sort of update my vocabulary to try and refer to people using the terms that seem to be preferred by the consensus of people in that group. And it's an ever-evolving thing. I can remember when the term handicapped was the accepted term, and then gradually that sort of fell into disuse or disfavor, and now disabled seems to be more acceptable. So I mean, whatever people want to be called. It's not up to me to decide what people are called. If someone says, I prefer to be referred to as diversely abled, I feel like my job is to say, okay, well, I will make an effort to refer to you that way if I ever have to refer to that part of you. I'm not going to force my term on you. I'm going to use whatever term you use to define yourself if I ever have to refer to you. That's just being polite and respectful. If I were to force other people to accept my term for them, that would make me an asshole. More so. Josh Carter. Hey Steve, I was wondering about your opinion on the Syrian refugee crisis and thought I would share my view if you would like to refute, argue, or agree with any of the points that I hold. I consider myself to be a centrist in that I believe we need components of both sides of the political spectrum in order to maintain a competent and useful government. However, when regressive right-wingers say we should just send them back where they came from with regards to Syrian refugees, you have to question their moral integrity. Send them back to where exactly? They've had thousands of pounds of ordnance dropped on their houses by their own government and ours. In my view, we really should express some sympathy and show some compassion to a fellow human being. The way I see it, if you want to go drop bombs over there, then we shouldn't go around crying about it when the resulting humanitarian crisis requires you to deal with the repercussions. What are your views on the matter? Thanks, Josh. I will not argue or refute. I will agree. I think you are completely right. My views on the Syrian refugee crisis as an American are that we should be accepting way more refugees than we are. It is a shame. It is a disgrace how few refugees the United States is going to be welcoming from the Syrian crisis in the next few years. And even more of a shame and a disgrace, how much of a fight there has been just over that relatively small number. The President Obama wants to accept 10,000, which is not only a tiny fraction of what other much smaller countries are accepting, but a fraction of what we have been asked to accept by the international community. I think, I could be wrong, this is just off the top of my head, but I think the United Nations asked that we in the United States accept 40,000, something like that, 40,000 or 60,000 refugees. And at present, the plan is to accept a total of 10,000. That's awful. That's inexcusable. When we are the country that has the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor that says, send me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. That is one of our most treasured ideals. And yet we have to fight each other to accept 10,000 refugees out of millions of people that are fleeing their homes. Because, as you point out, their country has been bombed into oblivion by their own government and by other governments. We should be accepting these people, as many as we can possibly absorb. And we should do it eagerly, because it's the right thing to do, it's the human thing to do, and it is the only thing to do that is in line with our stated values as a nation. If we truly are the nation that we say we are, and if other democracies in the world are truly the beacons of freedom and liberty and humanism that we like to say we are, then we have no choice. The only thing consistent with those values is to accept these refugees, to take them into our country, to help them find homes for themselves here and rebuild their lives, and to do it eagerly and gratefully and energetically. That's the only thing we can possibly do. All this fear-mongering and foot-dragging and reluctance about what to do about the refugees, treating them as though they are somehow imposing on us, as though this is all their fault, it is reprehensible. And it is contrary to the values of a democracy, and certainly contrary to the values of a democracy like the United States, which loves to thump its chest about how free and great and what a wonderful land of liberty and opportunity we are. We should be accepting far more than we are, and it is a disgrace that we are not. Matthew Datcher. I just saw a Facebook meme that said Atheist Logic 101. The disciples lied about Jesus' resurrection in order to secure for themselves the perks of imprisonment, torture, and martyrdom. What are your thoughts on such a statement? Oh, that sounds like the old die for a lie argument. The old Christian apologetic insistence that if the disciples had knowingly lied about the resurrection of Christ, that surely they would not have clung to their stories through their persecution and their martyrdom. I find that to be a very misleading statement, a very dishonest argument, for a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't know very much about the disciples. We have church traditions that tell us what the disciples did after the death and supposed resurrection and ascension of Jesus. What their ultimate fate was, whether they were killed, executed, martyred, what have you. We have church traditions that tell us many of those things, but those aren't always very reliable. So just because there is a traditional story, a church legend, if you will, that says the disciples were persecuted for their beliefs and they were martyred and they never recounted or recanted. They never changed their stories. They remained faithful and professing followers of Christ right to the end. We don't know that that's true. That could very well just be a story created by the church for obvious reasons. Obviously, the church would want to propagate the story that the disciples maintained their faith in the face of great persecution, that they were given the opportunity to renounce their faith and save their lives, which we don't know if they were ever even given that chance, that choice, and then decided not to, and decided it was better to die as true Christians than to betray Christ and save their lives. We don't know that any of that happened. Also, we don't know what the disciples sincerely believed about the resurrection. It's possible that the disciples may have genuinely believed that Jesus really did rise from the grave. That doesn't mean that that's what happened. The central claim that a dead person came back to life after being truly dead for days, all of a sudden came back to life, just spontaneously rose from the grave, and then went on to, appear to multitudes of people, and then rise bodily up into heaven to be accepted into heaven. There's no evidence that any of that happened. And those are extraordinary claims. I mean, incredibly extraordinary claims. Unprecedented. Stuff that just doesn't happen ever. That is completely outside the experience of any human that we can ever think of or know about. That just doesn't happen. When you die, you're dead. And you don't come back. And you certainly don't come back and then ascend into heaven. It's never ever happened. Ever. As far as we know. So just coming up with a plausible explanation for why it might have happened, which I think is what the die for a lie story is, that's a way of suggesting, well, no, we don't have any positive evidence that it did happen. But if it didn't happen, then why were the disciples like this? It's that's sort of what that argument is. And I just don't think that's good enough. If you expect me to believe that God worked a one-of-a-kind, once in history miracle and raised Jesus from death back to life and then pulled him up into heaven, where he stays, where he sits at the right hand of the Father to this day, I need more evidence that that actually happened. I don't need a clever story to suggest that, well, it could have happened, because if it didn't happen, then how do you account for this? I find it much easier to account for the behavior of the disciples after the supposed resurrection than I do accounting for the resurrection, if I assume that it really happened. Like the resurrection is by far the more implausible story, not the disciples maintaining their faith in the face of persecution. There are all kinds of reasons why people do that, and there are all kinds of things that could have happened to explain that, or to contradict those church legends that are the basis for a lot of those stories. So no, I need more. I need more if you expect me to believe that Jesus was resurrected. That's what I would say. I used to hear as a child that when you heard thunder, it meant that God was in heaven bowling, and thunder was like a strike. The pins all fell down when God was bowling, and that was thunder. So maybe that was Jesus, picking up a spare. You never know. I do know one thing, though, that it's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Natalie Kirk. Say there was a musical about wrestling, or some special fight that was a musical for some reason. Would you watch that? I mean, I might watch it. I wouldn't be excited about it. I might watch it just out of curiosity. I mean, I don't hate musicals so much that I refuse to ever watch them. Like, I've seen a lot of them. I just don't tend to enjoy them very much. Secular Scholar. Hey, Steve, have you seen Star Trek of Gods and Men or Star Trek Renegades? I think they're pretty cool in how they respect that which came before while truly blazing their own trail at the same time. What do you think about them? Yeah, I have seen them both. I think they're both good. I enjoyed them both. I think it's cool to see, some of the original cast members or people from actual previous Star Trek series taking part in it. Like Tim Russ and Walter Koenig. I mean, it's cool to see the Star Trek actors kind of coming back together to participate in these fan films. They're really neat and they're really well done. I still prefer my favorite Star Trek fan production to date is still Star Trek Continues, though. I think that is really well done. They've released 5 episodes so far. They're supposed to have a 6th episode come out in a few months, I think. That's my favorite of all of the Star Trek fan productions that I've seen. Fitz, you want me to throw away my cap? Yeah, I do. I really do. I want you to throw away your cap. Please do. Jim Nestor, hi Steve, lightning round question. MacGyver or B.A. Baracus? Who is the most ingenious? I pity the fool who doesn't see that MacGyver is obviously the most ingenious. That was MacGyver's gimmick. That's like saying, who had the best leg drop, Hulk Hogan or some other guy? Hulk Hogan. It was his finish. It was his leg drop. MacGyver was the inventive guy. So yes, clever though B.A. may have been, it was MacGyver. Hiding, lightning round. Thoughts on polyamory? Thoughts on adorable fluffy bunnies? No objection to either one. I'm fine with both. NH5316. Hi, Steve. Describe the U.S. in 5 words. Rip this one straight off the BBC website. Thanks in advance. The U.S. in 5 words. Good, but should be better. Gentle Hum 1. If you throw away dirty baseball caps, how many Hagerstown Suns hats do you have in reserve for the inevitable day they actually leave town? You know what? I don't have any. I guess if they ever do actually leave town and I need to replace my Suns cap, I'm gonna have to bite the bullet and just get a different hat. Maybe I'll go back to wearing an Orioles cap. In the old days before I was a YouTuber, you see, I would wear an Orioles cap. In fact, I think there might be some of my early YouTube videos where I do have an Orioles cap on, and it's pretty much the same design. It's black, and the logo has black and white and orange in it. It's very similar to the Suns cap in terms of color scheme, so I'd probably just go back to wearing an Orioles cap. Crowbro. Hey, Steve, who's the better role model, Batman or Superman? Superman. Batman's not a role model. Batman's a terrible role model. I mean, I love Batman. Don't get me wrong. Batman is awesome. He's a great character. I love to read about him and watch him. A huge mark for Batman. Terrible role model. Terrible, terrible role model. Superman is a much better role model. Radical Bacon. A friend of mine may be going back to prison. He let someone underage have some alcohol. He didn't give it to her. And now he's utterly fucking terrified of going back because someone vindictive has potentially called the cops. I'm just trying to be a good friend to him, which at this point means letting him cry a lot and making sure he's still eating. So if he does go back, do you have any big, thick books to recommend? Count of Monte Cristo? If that's in poor taste, don't tell your friend. If that'll just make your friend cry more, don't tell your friend I said that. Count of Monte Cristo seems like an obvious one to me, though. Best of luck with that, by the way. And on that happy note, that's the end of the questions. Before I get out of here, though, I'm going to give a shout out to a deserving YouTube channel, one that is undersubscribed, in my estimation. And this week, the shout out goes to a channel called Friendly Banjo Atheist. And as the title may have given away, this is about a guy who is friendly and plays the banjo and is an atheist. So if you enjoy music, if you enjoy live music performances or sort of impromptu acoustic musical performances in your YouTube videos, and you like to see that combined with a very reasonable, amiable criticism of religion, then this is really the channel for you, because the music is great, the songs are really wonderful and well performed. Personally, I love banjo music, and maybe not everybody does, but I think banjo music is great. The banjo playing is awesome, the songs are awesome, and the arguments, the atheist arguments, the critiques of religion and Christianity in particular, are very, very well done, very well spoken, and done with a very friendly tone. Friendly Banjo Atheist. All 3 of those words are very important in this title, in this YouTube channel. It is the brainchild, it is the product of Steve Boffman. He is the Friendly Banjo Atheist, and I really love his style. I love him on camera. I love his voice, and I love his musicianship. I think it's terrific. He hasn't uploaded a video since October. Hopefully that is just a temporary vacation that he is taking as he prepares new material, because I would hate to think that the material that is up on Friendly Banjo Atheist right now, as awesome as it is, will be the last that we see of him, because I think he's got a really great channel, criminally undersubbed, only 100 or so subscribers at this point, so please go check out Friendly Banjo Atheist, and if you are as taken with it as I was when I first saw it, please subscribe, because it is an awesome channel. I also want to remind you, as I always do around this time, to check out the Lemme Listen podcasts. These are podcasts that are created by my good pal, Jason Harding. You may know him as the creator of Opinionville, which you should be subscribed to also if you're not a fan of that YouTube channel. But the Lemme Listen podcasts are these podcasts that Jason does featuring himself, featuring Finite Atticus, and also featuring me. He and Finite Atticus do a show called Lemme Finish that is just hilarious. Jason, along with a bunch of guest stars, has produced another great show called American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, which is an improv comedy podcast with some supernatural overtones to it. I like to call it a combination of Twin Peaks and Coast to Coast AM. It's a great show that you should definitely check out as well. And also Late Seating, which is a movie review podcast that Jason does with me that is like one of my favorite things that I do now. I love this podcast. I love doing it. I think it's a really, really fun show. We take films of note, movies that are either famously great or famously terrible. We watch them, we give them a fresh look, we review them, we summarize, that's the word, summarize the plot and make fun of it for your entertainment, and then we decide whether these movies deserve the reputations that they have. It's a ton of fun to do, it's a lot of fun to listen to, and our new episode drops today as this video goes up on YouTube, and it is a review of the notorious bomb that actually killed a major Hollywood studio, believe it or not. Has a reputation of being one of the worst films ever made. A film by the name of Heaven's Gate. We watched Heaven's Gate for you and reviewed it, made a podcast about it, and I just think the least you could do is listen to it. That's all. We had to watch Heaven's Gate. It'd be nice if you listened to the show. So you can go and listen to our review of Heaven's Gate and all of our past episodes and all of the Lemme Listen podcasts of whatever show they might be a part of. You can go to LemmeListenPodcasts.com and do that. And I wish that you would, because I repeat, we watched Heaven's Gate. And that can't be for nothing. Please go listen to that show, please. Thank you. Don't let our suffering have been in vain. I urge you. I beg you. Hey, that's it, everybody. I'm out of here. Before I go, I want to remind you once again to please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until the next video, take care, everybody. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it and share it and subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.